She ran through the forest screaming, "Please kill me instead." And Kyle Obscuros, king of the eternal night, froze at her words. The moon hung full and merciless overhead, turning the pine needles to silver blades beneath her bare feet. Blood traced her path, small drops against ancient moss, but Alara didn't slow down. Behind her, 6 children huddled in the shadow of an oak tree, their small bodies pressed together like frightened birds. Ahead, the Vampire King stood on the forest path, his hand raised to signal the executioners. She had perhaps 3 seconds before the arrows flew. 3 seconds to change everything. So she screamed the only words that might matter. The forest went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. 200 soldiers in black armor stood frozen, their crossbows aimed at the cluster of children behind her. The king's hand remained suspended in the air, his expression unreadable beneath the silver crown that caught moonlight like captured stars. Alara stumbled to her knees in front of him, her chest heaving, her homespun dress torn from branches in desperation. "Please," she gasped. "They're children. They didn't know the apples belonged to your orchard. I'll take their punishment. Kill me instead." Kyle Obscuros lowered his hand slowly. His eyes were the color of winter midnight, dark and fathomless, and they studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He was tall, impossibly tall, with shoulders that blocked out the moonlight behind him. His face could have been carved from marble, beautiful and terrible in equal measure, with sharp cheekbones and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile centuries ago. "The accused are children," he said quietly, his voice carrying through the silent forest like distant thunder. "But the law is clear. Theft from the royal orchards is punishable by death." Alara forced herself to meet his gaze. "Then, execute me. I'm their teacher, their guardian. If anyone should pay, it's me." A murmur rippled through the soldiers. The king's second in command, a scarred vampire with silver streaking his dark hair, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, the woman is clearly lying to protect them. We found the children with the stolen fruit. Not her." "I'm not lying," Alara said, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. "I sent them. I told them to pick apples because we haven't eaten in 3 days. The orphanage receives no funding from the crown. We survive on what we can grow and what we can find. If that makes me a criminal, then I'm guilty. Kill me and let them go." The king's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those dark eyes. Something that might have been surprise, or might have been interest. He descended from the slight rise where he'd been standing, each step deliberate and controlled. The soldiers parted before him like water before a ship's bow. He stopped 3 paces from Alara, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his black hair, the faint scars on his hands that spoke of old battles. "You run an orphanage," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, in the eastern village. 32 children, all human, all under the age of 12. We take in those who have nowhere else to go." "And you're their teacher?" "Teacher, caretaker, cook, healer." She lifted her chin despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Whatever they need me to be. Healer." The king's gaze sharpened. "You have medical training?" "My mother was a physician. She taught me everything she knew before she died." Ilara's voice caught on the last word, but she pushed through. "I can set bones, treat fevers, deliver babies, stitch wounds. I know 37 medicinal plants by sight, and can compound over 50 remedies." "And why?" the king asked softly. "Would a trained physician be stealing apples from my orchards?" "Because knowledge doesn't fill empty stomachs." Ilara's exhaustion was catching up with her, making her bold, or perhaps just honest. "Because I can heal a child's fever, but I can't cure hunger. Because the village physician died last winter and no one came to replace him, so I treat anyone who asks for help, and they pay me in whatever they can spare, which is usually nothing. Because we survive day by day, and today those children were hungry. The silence that followed felt heavy, weighted with judgment. Behind her, Elara heard one of the children whimper. 6-year-old Thomas, probably. He cried easily, especially when he was frightened. She wanted to turn around, to comfort him, but she didn't dare take her eyes off the Vampire King. Cael Obscuro studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to his second in command. "How many physicians do we have in the palace?" The scarred vampire hesitated. 3, Your Majesty. All vampire specialists, none trained in human medicine. The Eastern Territories have been requesting a physician for 8 months, and have we sent one? No, Your Majesty. The king's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked back at Elara, and for just a moment, she thought she saw something like regret cross his face. It was gone too quickly to be certain. "You offer your life for theirs," he said. "That's a bold bargain. It's the only one I have. Then let me propose another." His voice was quiet, but it carried absolute authority. "You claim to be a healer. Prove it. Serve as palace physician for 1 year. In exchange, your children will be fed, housed, and educated at crown expense. The orphanage will receive full funding. And at the year's end, if you've fulfilled your duties, all debts are forgiven." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. She searched his face for deception, for cruelty, for the trap she knew must be there. But his expression remained neutral, waiting. "What about the children?" she asked. "I can't leave them alone. They come with you. There are unused quarters in the East Wing. They'll have beds, food, tutors." The king's tone suggested this was not negotiable. "You'll have access to them every evening. But during the day, you work. You treat anyone who requires care, human or vampire. You answer to me directly. And if I refuse, then we proceed with the original sentence. 6 children for 6 stolen apples. The executioners await my command. It was no choice at all, and they both knew it." Elara looked past the king to where the children huddled, their faces pale in the moonlight. Sarah, the eldest at 11, had her arms around the younger ones. Marcus was trying not to cry. Little Thomas had given up trying. They were hers. She'd pulled them from the streets, from abusive homes, from the edges of starvation. She'd promised them safety, promised them family. "I accept," Elara said. The king nodded once, sharp and final. "Then it's done." He turned to his soldiers. "Lower your weapons. These children are under crown protection. Arrest anyone who threatens them." The palace rose from the mountainside like a crown of shadows and silver, its towers piercing the night sky. Elara had seen it from a distance before, a dark silhouette against the stars, but up close it was something else entirely. Obsidian walls caught the moonlight and threw it back in fragments, making the entire structure seem to shimmer and shift. Gargoyles crouched at every corner, their stone eyes watching the approach of the royal carriages. The children pressed against the carriage windows, their fear temporarily forgotten in wonder. Even exhausted and terrified, they were still children, and the palace was like something from a fairy tale, a dark fairy tale perhaps, but magnificent nonetheless. "We'll have real beds," Sarah whispered, her voice small and hopeful. Elara squeezed her hand, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "Real beds," she confirmed, "and food. And you'll go to school with the other palace children." "Are there other children here?" Marcus asked. He was 9, serious and thoughtful, always asking questions. The Vampire King didn't answer that, and Elara realized with a chill that she had no idea. She'd agreed to serve in a palace she knew nothing about, under a king whose reputation was built on centuries of ruthless rule, in a world of vampires where humans were, at best, second-class citizens. She'd traded one form of death for another. Perhaps a slower one, but death nonetheless. The carriages stopped in a courtyard lit by torches that burned with an eerie blue flame. Servants appeared immediately, human and vampire both, moving with practiced efficiency. The Vampire King dismounted first, his black cloak swirling around him like living shadow. A thin vampire with silver spectacles approached, bowing low. "Your Majesty, welcome back. I trust the hunt was successful?" "The hunt is concluded," Kale said flatly. "This is Alara Thorne. She'll be serving as palace physician specializing in human medicine. She and her wards require quarters in the East Wing. Prepare the old nursery suite." The spectacled vampire's eyes widened fractionally behind his glasses, the first sign of surprise Alara had seen from any of the palace staff. "The nursery suite? Your Majesty? It hasn't been used in nearly a decade." Then it's time it was opened. The king's tone allowed no argument. "See that it's cleaned and furnished appropriately for 6 children and their guardian. Provide everything they need. Clothes, books, toys, whatever human children require. As you wish. Your Majesty." The servant bowed again, but Alara caught the curious glance he threw in her direction. She helps the children down from the carriage one by one, checking each for injuries from their desperate flight through the forest. Thomas had a scrape on his knee. Sarah's hands were raw from clutching tree bark. But they were alive. They were safe. For now. "Follow Corvin," the king said to Alara. "He'll show you to your quarters. You'll begin your duties tomorrow at dawn. Report to the healing wing. Someone will instruct you." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Alara Thorne?" She looked up, meeting those dark winter eyes. "Yes, Your Majesty. Don't make me regret this mercy." He was gone before she could respond, his cloak billowing behind him as he strode toward the main palace entrance. The servants scattered before him like leaves before a storm. Alara stood in the courtyard, surrounded by frightened children and curious vampires, and wondered what she'd just agreed to. The nursery suite was bigger than the entire orphanage. 3 bedrooms connected to a central common room, with a bathroom that had actual running water and a small kitchenette. The furniture was old but beautiful, carved from dark wood and upholstered in deep blues and silvers. Dust covers had been removed, fires lit in the hearths. It was warm and clean and safe. The children explored with increasing excitement, their earlier fear giving way to the resilience of youth. "Look, there are books." Marcus called from one of the bedrooms. "An entire shelf. And the beds are so soft," Thomas added, bouncing experimentally on one. "Miss Alara, there's a balcony. We can see the whole kingdom from here." Alara let them explore, their joy a balm to her frayed nerves. Corvin, the spectacled vampire, stood in the doorway, watching with an expression that might have been approval. "They're quite spirited," he observed. "They're children," Alara replied. "They deserve to be spirited." Indeed, he adjusted his glasses. "I should inform you, Miss Thorne, that you've been assigned rather unusual quarters. The nursery suite was prepared for the royal heir many years ago. It's been empty since the prince died." Alara's breath caught. "I didn't know. How did he?" "Fever," Corvin said quietly. "A blood fever that affects young vampires. We lost 17 children that year, including the heir to the throne. His Majesty forbade anyone from using these rooms afterward. Until tonight." "So why?" Alara started, but the question died on her lips. She thought of the king's expression when she'd mentioned her medical training, the sharp interest when she'd said healer. "I don't presume to understand His Majesty's reasoning," Corvin said diplomatically, "but I would suggest that someone with your skills, willing to sacrifice herself for children, might have reminded him of something he lost. Or someone." He bowed slightly. "Breakfast will be brought at dawn. The healing wing is on the 3rd floor, east corridor. Someone will fetch you." "And Miss Thorne?" She turned. "Yes?" "Welcome to Shadowkeep Palace. Few humans are granted the privilege of serving here. Fewer still are trusted with the king's direct patronage. Whatever you did in that forest, it mattered. Try to remember that when the work becomes difficult." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Ilara stood in the center of the room, surrounded by ghosts of children who'd died in a plague she'd never heard of, serving a king who'd lost his heir to illness, in a palace that ran on rules she didn't understand. And tomorrow, she would begin trying to heal both humans and vampires with medicine designed for one and not the other, hoping her knowledge would be enough, knowing that if it wasn't, 6 children would pay the price for her failure. Sarah appeared at her elbow, slipping her small hand into Ilara's. "Are you scared, Miss Ilara?" Ilara pulled the girl close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Terrified," she admitted. "But we're together. That's what matters. We're family." "Family," Sarah agreed. The word hung in the air, fragile and precious. Outside, the moon set behind the mountains, and the palace of eternal night welcomed the dawn with silence. The healing wing smelled of herbs and antiseptic, a familiar scent that eased some of the tension in Ilara's shoulders. She'd arrived at dawn as instructed, leaving the children in Sarah's capable care with strict instructions about staying in their quarters until she returned. The healing wing was larger than she'd expected, a series of interconnected rooms with high ceilings and tall windows that let in the early morning light. Most of the beds were empty, but a few held patients, both human and vampire, attended by healers in dark blue robes. A vampire woman with steel-gray hair and sharp green eyes approached her, looking Ilara up and down with obvious skepticism. "You're the human physician?" Her tone suggested she'd found a particularly interesting insect. Ilara straightened her spine. "I am. Ilara Thorne. You may call me Physician Thorne, or Miss Thorne. Not that." The woman's eyebrow arched. "Proud for someone who was nearly executed yesterday. I'm told the king himself intervened. How fortunate for you. The king offered me a position in exchange for my medical expertise," Ilara replied evenly. "I intend to fulfill my duties to the best of my considerable ability. If you have concerns about my qualifications, I'm happy to demonstrate my knowledge. Otherwise, perhaps you could show me where I'll be working?" A slight smile tugged at the healer's mouth. "Well, perhaps you have some spine after all. I'm Mira, head healer. I've run this wing for 40 years, and I don't tolerate incompetence or arrogance. But if you're skilled as the king seems to believe, we can use you. Follow me." She led Ilara through the wing, pointing out supplies, protocols, and the various sections dedicated to different types of care. The organization was impressive, more sophisticated than anything Ilara had seen in human hospitals. But as they walked, she noticed something troubling. "Where are the human patients?" she asked. "You had 3 beds occupied in the west room, but I saw only 1 human. Where do the others go?" "They don't," Mira said bluntly. "Most humans can't afford palace care. They use village healers or they suffer. We treat palace staff if they're injured on duty, but that's rare. So I'm here to, what? Treat servants?" "You're here because the king commanded it." Mira's tone softened slightly, "But if you want my honest assessment, you're here because he's trying to change something." The Eastern Territories have been requesting physicians for months. Human settlements are growing, and they need medical care. The king has been considering establishing clinics, but he needs someone who understands human medicine to design them. That's you. Ilara absorbed this, her mind racing. A chance to actually help people, not just survive day to day. It was more than she'd hoped for. "I can do that," she said. "I'll need supplies, access to medical texts, and time to survey what's needed, but I can design a clinic system." "Ambitious," Mira observed. "We'll see if you survive your first week first. Come. I want to show you something." She led Ilara to a small room at the end of the wing. Inside, a young vampire lay on a bed, his skin pale even by vampire standards. Dark circles under his closed eyes. He couldn't have been more than 16. Frozen at that age for eternity. His breathing was shallow, labored. Mira stood at the foot of the bed, her expression troubled. This is Damien, the king's nephew. He's been sick for 3 weeks with blood fever, the same illness that killed the royal heir 10 years ago. Our vampire healers have tried everything. Nothing works. Blood fever, Elara echoed, moving closer. What are the symptoms? High fever, weakness, inability to metabolize blood properly. The body essentially starves despite feeding. In young vampires, it's almost always fatal. Mira's voice was heavy. We've lost 2 other patients to it this month. If we can't find a treatment, we'll lose more. May I examine him? Elara was already assessing the boy's appearance, her physician's mind cataloging symptoms. Mira gestured permission. Be my guest. If you can succeed where we've failed, I'll eat my skepticism. Elara approached the bed, gently checking Damien's pulse, his breathing, the temperature of his skin. His veins were dark beneath pale skin, more prominent than they should be. She lifted his eyelid carefully, noting the bloodshot whites, the dilated pupil. Have you checked for secondary infections? She asked. Bacterial or parasitic? It's a blood fever, Mira said. Not an infection. Perhaps, but the symptoms you're describing sound like sepsis with complications. In humans, when the body can't process nutrients properly, it's often because something is interfering with absorption. Elara continued her examination, her fingers gentle but thorough. Have you tested his blood for abnormalities? We've examined it, of course. It's contaminated, toxic. That's the nature of the fever. Or that's the result of something causing the fever. Elara straightened, her mind working through possibilities. In human medicine, when we see this presentation, we look for parasitic infections that attack the blood itself. Malaria, for instance, or certain tropical diseases. Have vampires been tested for blood parasites? Mira stared at her. Vampires don't get parasites. We're functionally dead. We're the parasites. You're animated corpses with functioning circulatory systems, Elara corrected. If blood flows, parasites can travel. And if young vampires are more susceptible, it's probably because their immune systems are still transitioning from human to vampire. They're vulnerable in ways adult vampires aren't. The head healer's expression shifted from skepticism to something that might have been hope. You think it's treatable? I think it's diagnosable, which is the first step. Elara moved to the supply cabinets, scanning the contents. I'll need a microscope, clean slides, and drawing needles. If I'm right, we'll see the parasites in his blood. If I'm wrong, we've ruled out one possibility and we move on. But if you're right, Mira said slowly, if this is parasitic, we've been treating the symptoms instead of the cause for a decade. We could have saved. She stopped, her voice catching. The prince. You might have saved the prince. Maybe, Elara said gently. Or maybe the parasite strain was different. Or the progression was too advanced. You can't know. All we can do is try to save the patient in front of us right now. The microscope revealed what Elara had suspected. Tiny parasites, almost invisible to the naked eye, swimming through Damien's blood like malevolent stars. They attached to red blood cells, draining them, multiplying with terrifying efficiency. Mira stood beside her, staring through the lens with an expression that cycled through shock, horror, and fury. By the ancient gods, she breathed. You were right. They're everywhere. Now we treat, Elara said, her mind already cataloging anti-parasitic compounds. I'll need bitterbark extract, wormwood tincture, and silver root if you have it. The combination should kill the parasites without harming the host. But I'll need to adjust the dosage for vampire physiology. We have all of those, Mira said, already moving toward the medicinal storage. How did you know? What silver root would work on vampires? I didn't, Elara admitted. But silver affects vampires, and silver root contains trace amounts of the metal in organic form. Small enough not to poison him, large enough to make his blood inhospitable to parasites. It's a calculated risk. Better than watching him die, Mira said grimly. She returned with the components, and together they compounded the treatment. Ilara's steady hands mixing precise measurements while Mira watched with grudging respect. When the medicine was ready, a dark liquid that smelled of earth and bitterness, Ilara administered it carefully, drop by drop into Damien's mouth. Now we wait, she said. If the parasites die, his body should begin to recover within hours. If they don't, we adjust and try again. Mira nodded, but her attention was elsewhere. I need to tell the king. If this works, if we've finally found the cause after all these years, he needs to know. She paused at the door. Ilara, if you've done this, if you've solved what killed his son, you've given him something no one else could. The truth. Ilara watched the older healer leave, then settled into the chair beside Damien's bed. She checked his pulse every few minutes, monitoring for any changes, good or bad. The morning light strengthened, filling the room with pale gold. It felt surreal, sitting in a vampire palace, treating a disease that had killed a prince. All because she'd run through a forest screaming for mercy for 6 stolen apples. Life, she reflected, was strange. And about to get stranger. Footsteps approached, measured and deliberate. Ilara didn't need to look up to know who it was. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, the air growing heavier with presence and power. King Kael Obscuros stopped in the doorway, his dark eyes finding Damien first, then shifting to Ilara. Mira says you've identified the illness. His voice was carefully neutral, but Ilara caught the tension underneath. A parasitic infection, yes. Ilara stood, meeting his gaze steadily. Blood parasites that interfere with nutrient absorption. I've administered treatment. We should know within a few hours if it's effective. And if it is, he said quietly, this is what killed my son. Possibly, Ilara replied gently. I can't say for certain without examining records from that time, if they still exist. But the symptoms Mira described matched this presentation. The king moved to the bedside, looking down at his nephew with an expression Ilara couldn't read. Damien was 10, he said. My son. When the fever took him, we tried everything. Brought in healers from across the realm. Nothing worked. He lasted 6 days. I'm sorry, Ilara said, and meant it. No parent should lose a child. I'm not a parent anymore. The words were sharp, bitter. I'm a king who failed to save his heir. There's a difference. With respect, Your Majesty, you're a father who lost his son. Ilara's voice was soft but firm. The crown doesn't erase grief. It just makes it harder to acknowledge. Kyle's eyes snapped to hers, and for a moment she thought she'd overstepped. But instead of anger, she saw something raw and wounded, quickly hidden behind the mask of royal composure. You speak boldly for someone in your position. I speak truthfully, which is what a physician must do. Ilara held his gaze. You asked me to serve as healer. That means telling you things you might not want to hear, especially about health and loss. If you wanted comfortable lies, you should have hired a courtier. A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh, harsh and surprised. Mira warned me you had spine. I thought she was being generous. He looked back at Damien. If your treatment works, if you save him, you'll have given me something I thought lost forever. Hope that I can protect young vampires from this disease. Hope that my son's death wasn't entirely meaningless. Hope is dangerous, Your Majesty, Ilara said quietly, but it's also necessary. Without it, we're just waiting to die. Then let us hope together, physician. He turned to leave, then paused. The children. How are they adjusting? They're resilient, Ilara replied, frightened but adapting. Sarah's looking after the younger ones. They're good children, just hungry and overlooked. Like many in my kingdom, the king said, and there was something dark in his tone, something that spoke of awareness and shame. That needs to change. Your clinic proposal, when it's ready, bring it directly to me. Not the council. Not the advisors. Me. I'll make sure it's funded and implemented. Elara blinked in surprise. Your Majesty. It's practical, he interrupted. I can spend decades in council debates while children die of treatable illnesses. Or I can act. You've shown me in one morning what years of traditional healing missed. I'm inclined to trust your judgment. He left without another word, his cloak swirling behind him. Elara stood in the sudden silence, processing what had just happened. The king of vampires had just given her carte blanche to design a medical system for his kingdom. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Damien's fever broke 2 hours later. Elara watched the color return to his skin, his breathing ease, his body relax into genuine rest instead of feverish unconsciousness. By midday, his eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then clearing. Where? He started, his voice hoarse. The healing wing, Elara said gently, moving to his side. You've been very sick, but you're going to be fine now. You're the human physician, Damien said, studying her with dark eyes that reminded her of his uncle, the one who saved herself and 6 orphans from execution. Mira told me the story. That's an interesting way to phrase it, Elara replied, checking his pulse. I prefer to think I negotiated alternative employment. You sacrificed yourself, Damien insisted. Threw yourself between children and death. That's not employment. That's love. Perhaps, Elara allowed. How do you feel? Weak. Hungry. But better than I have in weeks. He tried to sit up, and she helped him, adjusting pillows. What did you do? What the vampire healers couldn't, Elara said with a slight smile. I looked at your blood through a microscope and saw what was actually wrong. Then I treated it like the parasite infection it was. You saved my life. It's what physicians do, Elara replied. Or try to, anyway. You're young. You should have many more years ahead of you. Centuries, Damien corrected. I'm vampire. We measure time differently. He paused. My uncle will be relieved. He's been visiting every night, sitting beside my bed when he thought no one was watching, talking to me about his son, about how he couldn't bear to lose another. Elara felt something tighten in her chest. He loves you very much. He carries so much grief, Damien said quietly. The prince's death broke something in him. He used to be different before. Warmer. He'd laugh, tell stories. Then the fever came, and when his son died, the king everyone fears was born from that loss. It's easier to be feared than to be hurt again, Elara observed. Safer. Yes, Damien agreed. But lonelier. He looked at her with surprising intensity. You see him clearly, don't you? The man beneath the crown. Not many do. I see a father who lost his child, Elara said. Everything else is just protection from that pain. You should tell him that. He needs to hear it. I'm his physician, not his counselor. And I'm his nephew, not his son, Damien countered. But he needs both of us. He needs people who see past the armor he's built. People who remind him that being strong doesn't mean being alone. Before Elara could respond, Mira entered with a tray of blood-enriched broth, her expression lighter than it had been in days. Well, she said to Damien, you're sitting up. That's progress. I feel almost alive, Damien joked, then winced. Wrong phrase. You feel almost undead, Mira corrected with a smile. Which for vampires is the goal. She set the tray down and turned to Elara. Word spreading about your diagnosis. 3 other patients with similar symptoms have been brought in from neighboring estates. Young vampires, all presenting with the same fever. If your treatment works consistently, you'll have saved dozens, maybe hundreds over time. Then let's make sure it does, Elara said. I'll need to examine each patient individually, adjust dosages for age and severity, and we should start documenting everything, creating protocols so other healers can replicate the treatment. Already done, Mira said, producing a leather journal. I've been taking notes since you identified the parasites. Every step, every measurement. This won't be lost again. The two women worked through the afternoon, treating the new patients, monitoring Damien's continued improvement, refining the anti-parasitic protocol. By evening, all 4 young vampires were showing signs of recovery. The success rate was unprecedented, miraculous even. News reached the king by sunset. Elara was washing her hands, preparing to return to the children, when Kael appeared in the healing wing. His presence commanded immediate attention, servants and healers alike bowing as he passed. But his focus was singular. "Show me," he said to Elara. "The treatment, the process, everything." She did, leading him through each step, explaining the parasites, the medicine, the mechanism of action. He listened with complete focus, asking sharp questions that revealed a keen intelligence beneath the royal bearing. When she finished, he stood silently for a long moment. 4 patients, he said finally. 4 young vampires who would have died. "Yes, Your Majesty." "And my son? Could he have been saved?" Elara chose her words carefully. If the parasites were the same strain, and if we'd caught it early enough, possibly. "But Kael, there's no way to know for certain. 10 years is a long time. The disease may have progressed differently. The treatment might not have existed yet." "You don't," he said sharply. "Don't absolve me. I failed him. That's fact, not emotion." "You lost him," Elara corrected gently. "There's a difference. Failure implies you didn't try, didn't care. From everything I've heard, you moved heaven and earth to save your son. That's not failure. That's love meeting limits." His jaw tightened, and she saw him wrestling with something. Grief and anger and pain all fighting for dominance. After a moment he spoke, his voice rough. He liked stories. "My son, every night before sleep, he'd demand a story, something with dragons and magic and heroes who always won. I'd make them up, ridiculous tales that made him laugh. The night he died, I couldn't think of a single story. My mind went blank. He asked for one, and I just stood there, useless. That's the image that haunts me. Not the fever, not the healers failing. The look on his face when he realized I had no more stories to tell." "That wasn't failure either," Elara said quietly. "That was a father watching his child slip away and being too heartbroken to pretend everything would be fine. Your son didn't need a story in that moment. He needed you there. And you were." Kael looked at her, really looked, and for the first time she saw past the vampire king to the broken father underneath. "Thank you," he said finally. "For Damien. For the others. For seeing what everyone else missed." The weeks that followed established a rhythm. Elara spent her days in the healing wing, treating patients and training other healers in the new protocols. Her evenings belonged to the children, hearing about their days with tutors and other palace children, reading them stories, tucking them into beds that were always warm and safe. And late at night, often past midnight, King Kael would appear in the healing wing. Sometimes he came to check on Damien, who was recovering beautifully. Sometimes he came with questions about the clinic proposals Elara was developing. Sometimes he just came, sitting in the corner while she worked, a silent presence that gradually became familiar. Tonight he arrived carrying a leather-bound book, old and worn. Elara looked up from the medical text she was studying, raising an eyebrow. "Your Majesty. Working late again?" "Sleep is overrated," Kael replied, settling into what had become his usual chair. "Besides, I brought something." He held out the book. "It's a journal. My son's physician kept detailed notes about his illness. Every symptom, every treatment attempted, every change in condition. I thought you might want to see it." Elara's breath caught. She took the journal carefully, as if it might shatter. "This must be painful for you to share." "It is," he acknowledged. "But if it helps you understand the disease better, helps you save more children, then the pain serves a purpose." She opened it carefully, scanning the elegant handwriting. The physician had been meticulous, documenting everything with clinical precision. But between the medical observations, there were personal notes. The prince is brave today. The prince asked about his mother. The prince wants his father. I've never shown this to anyone, Kale said quietly. It felt too private, too raw. But you've proven you understand the balance between medical necessity and human compassion. I trust you with it. Elara felt the weight of that trust settle over her like a mantle. She read through the entries, her physician's mind cataloging symptoms, her heart breaking at the story beneath the medical language. A 10-year-old boy, scared and suffering, calling for parents who couldn't save him. Thank you for this, she said finally. It confirms the parasitic theory. The progression matches what I've seen in the recent cases. If we'd had this treatment then, he would have lived, Kyle finished. I know. You can't know that with certainty, Elara argued gently. Medicine isn't perfect. There are always variables, but yes, there's a good chance he would have survived. The king leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. His name was Theron. We don't speak it much in the palace. Too painful, but you should know it. The heir you might have saved was named Theron, and he loved dragons and sweet cakes and making his tutors laugh. He was kind, thoughtful, curious about everything, and I couldn't protect him from something I couldn't even see. Elara closed the journal carefully. Kyle, may I say something that might be inappropriate? He looked at her, a hint of curiosity in his dark eyes. You've never let propriety stop you before. Why start now? You're punishing yourself for not having knowledge that didn't exist yet. She met his gaze steadily. 10 years ago, no one knew about these parasites. The microscopes weren't powerful enough. The research hadn't been done. You brought in every healer you could find, tried every treatment they suggested. You did everything possible with the tools available. Demanding more of yourself is like demanding you should have breathed underwater. It's not humanly possible. I'm not human, he reminded her. No, but you were a father. And fathers aren't omnipotent, no matter how much they wish to be. Silence fell between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Outside, the moon rose over the mountains, painting the healing wing in silver light. After a while, Kyle spoke again. The children. The ones you saved. Tell me about them. Elara smiled. Sarah's the eldest. 11. Practical. Fierce, she mothers the others even though she's barely more than a child herself. Marcus is 9, thoughtful and quiet. He reads everything he can find. Thomas is 6 and cries easily, but he's getting braver. Then there's Emma and the twins, Lily and Rose. They're all good children who deserved better than what life gave them. Like many in my kingdom, Kale said, echoing his earlier words. I've been thinking about your clinic proposals. They're comprehensive, well-reasoned, but they're also modest. You're asking for 3 clinics to serve the Eastern Territories. I want to fund 10, spread across the realm. Any settlement with more than 500 humans gets access to medical care. Elara stared at him. Your Majesty, that's ambitious. It's necessary. He stood, moving to the window. I've ruled for 2 centuries, Elara. Built an empire on strength and fear. But what good is an empire if its people suffer from preventable illnesses? What kind of king lets children die because their villages can't afford physicians? Your clinics won't just save lives. They'll change how humans see vampire rule. Right now, we're oppressors, necessary evils to be endured. But if we provide care, education, protection, we become something else. Partners, perhaps. Or at least, less hated. This is about more than medicine, Elara realized. You're trying to change the entire relationship between vampires and humans. Is that naive? He asked, turning to face her. Probably, she admitted, but it's also brilliant. And kind. And exactly what this kingdom needs. Thank you for trusting me to help build it. The king's expression softened, something that might have been relief crossing his features. I should let you return to your children. It's late. Actually, Elara said, an idea forming. Would you like to meet them? Properly, I mean, not as the king who spared their lives, but as a person. His surprise was evident. I don't think that's wise. They're children. They'll be terrified. Or, Elara suggested, they'll see what I see. Someone who cares more than he admits. Someone who makes terrible jokes and carries journals that hurt to read because the pain serves a purpose. Someone who's trying to be better than fear and strength alone. You have remarkable faith in children's perception. They're better judges of character than adults, Elara said. Adults see the crown. Children see the person wearing it. Come to breakfast tomorrow. Let them thank you themselves. I'll consider it, Kale said, but she could see the interest in his eyes. Kale Obscuros appeared at the nursery suite precisely at dawn, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Elara answered the door, already dressed, and had to suppress a smile at the Vampire King's obvious uncertainty. They don't bite, she assured him. That's supposed to be my line, he replied dryly, but stepped inside. The children were gathered around the breakfast table, plates laden with food that still amazed them after weeks in the palace. They fell silent when the king entered, their eyes wide. Sarah, ever the responsible one, stood and curtsied, prompting the others to follow suit with varying degrees of coordination. Your Majesty, Sarah said carefully, thank you for having us in your home. Kale looked at Elara helplessly, clearly out of his depth. She gestured encouragement. This is your home too, he said finally, for as long as you need it. Please, sit. Eat. Don't stop on my account. An awkward silence followed. Then Thomas, bless his fearless heart, piped up. Do you really sleep in a coffin? Thomas. Sarah hissed, mortified. It's all right, Kyle said, and to everyone's surprise, he smiled slightly. No, I don't sleep in a coffin. I have a bed, just like you. Coffins are uncomfortable and impractical, but in stories, Thomas insisted. In stories, vampires do many things we don't actually do, Kale replied, settling into an empty chair. We also supposedly can't enter homes without invitation, turn into bats and sparkle in sunlight. All false. You can't turn into a bat? The boy's disappointment was profound. Sorry, no. We're just people who happen to need blood to survive and have extended lifespans. Rather boring, actually. You saved us from execution, Marcus said quietly. That's not boring. That's heroic. I didn't save you, Kyle said, looking uncomfortable with the praise. Miss Elara saved you. I simply recognized that executing children for hunger was unjust. But you changed your mind, Marcus persisted. Most people don't do that. Most people, once they've decided something, stick to it even when it's wrong. You listened to Miss Elara and chose differently. That's rare. The king's expression flickered, something surprised and pleased. You're a thoughtful young man. Thank you. The conversation gradually eased, the children's natural curiosity overcoming their fear. They asked about the palace, about vampire customs, about whether he'd ever met a dragon. Kyle answered patiently, and Elara watched something remarkable happen. The king relaxed. Not completely. There was still guardedness in his posture, but his shoulders dropped, his voice warmed, and when Emma asked if she could see his crown, he let her try it on. It's heavy, Emma pronounced, the crown sliding down, over her eyes. Too heavy for my head. Crowns usually are, Kyle agreed, gently retrieving it. They're meant to remind rulers that power is a burden, not a privilege. After breakfast, as the children dispersed to their morning lessons, Sarah lingered. She approached the king with careful dignity. Your Majesty, I wanted to say something. Of course. Sarah took a breath. We know we're here because Miss Elara traded herself for us. We know you didn't have to agree to that trade. Most rulers wouldn't have. So thank you. Not just for the food and the beds and the education, though those matter. Thank you for seeing us as worth saving. The king looked at this 11-year-old girl with the weight of the world on her shoulders, and something in his expression cracked. "You were always worth saving," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, it took desperation to make me see it. But I do see it now. All of you. You're not burdens or charity cases. You're children who deserved better. I'm trying to make sure you get it." Sarah nodded, satisfied, and went to join her siblings. Kyle stood alone with Alara in the quiet room. "That was," he started, then stopped. "Harder than I expected," Alara finished gently. "Yes." He ran a hand through his hair, a surprisingly human gesture. "They're so young. So trusting. Sarah's already protecting them like a warrior. Marcus thinks like a philosopher. And Thomas reminds me of Theron," Cale said quietly. "The questions, the curiosity, the absolute certainty that the world should make sense. It's painful and wonderful at the same time." "Children have that effect," Alara said. "They make you hope even when hope seems foolish." "Come back tomorrow," she suggested. "Have breakfast with them again. It'll get easier." "Why would I do that?" "Because you enjoyed it," Alara said simply, "and because they need to see that powerful people can be kind. That authority doesn't have to mean fear. You're teaching them what good leadership looks like." "And what am I learning?" he asked. "That vulnerability isn't weakness," Alara replied. "That letting people see you, really see you, doesn't diminish power. It just makes you human. Or as human as a vampire can be." He smiled. A real smile this time. Small but genuine. "You're dangerous, Physician Thorne." "How so?" "You make me want to be better than I am. You make me remember who I was before grief turned me to stone. That's terrifying." "Good," Alara said. "Comfortable kings don't change kingdoms. Terrified ones might actually accomplish something." The clinic system took shape over the following months. Alara traveled to the Eastern Territories with Cale and a team of healers, surveying needs, training local physicians, establishing supply chains. She watched the king interact with his human subjects, seeing their initial fear gradually give way to cautious hope. He listened to their concerns, funded solutions, and made it clear that neglect would no longer be tolerated. In a small village where children were dying from contaminated water, Kyle personally funded a new well system. When a town's only healer fell ill, he sent 3 vampire physicians to cover until the human recovered. Slowly, incrementally, the Eastern Territories began to trust their vampire king, but it was in the palace that the most profound changes occurred. Kyle came to breakfast with the children every morning, becoming a fixture in the nursery suite. He taught Marcus chess, played imagination games with the younger ones, and listened to Sarah's increasingly sophisticated questions about governance and justice. And late at night, he and Alara would sit in the healing wing, talking about medicine and loss, and the impossible task of being responsible for entire kingdoms while nursing private grief. One night, 3 months after the children's arrival, Kyle brought a bottle of ancient wine and 2 glasses. "I want to tell you something," he said, settling into his chair. "The night Theron died, I made a vow. No more connections. No more love. If I didn't care, I couldn't lose. I'd rule with strength and distance, and I'd never hurt like that again." He poured the wine with steady hands. "I kept that vow for 10 years. Turned myself into exactly what vampires are supposed to be. Cold, powerful, untouchable. It was safe. It was lonely, but it was safe. And then a human woman ran through my forest screaming for me to kill her, instead of 6 children she'd claimed as family." Alara accepted the glass he offered, waiting. "You destroyed my safety," Kyle continued. "Forced me to see people as individuals, not subjects, those children with their questions and laughter. You with your blunt truths and brilliant mind. Damien recovering because you saw what no one else did. You made me care again, and I resent you for it." He paused, "And I'm grateful beyond words. I didn't set out to change you," Alara said softly, I just wanted to save 6 children. I know, that's what makes it real. You didn't manipulate or scheme. You just loved completely and demanded I recognize that love had value. That caring was strength, not weakness. He met her eyes. You've changed this kingdom, Alara. The clinics are transforming how humans view vampire rule. The medical protocols are saving lives. But more than that, you've changed me, made me remember that being a king doesn't mean being alone, that I can be both strong and kind, both ruler and father figure, both vampire and something close to human. Alara felt her throat tighten. Kyle, I don't, he said, echoing her words from months ago. Don't absolve me of responsibility for my own transformation. I chose to listen. I chose to change. You just gave me reason to try. They sat in comfortable silence, sipping wine that tasted like centuries of patience. Outside, the kingdom slept under stars that had watched empires rise and fall. Tomorrow, Kyle said eventually, there's a ceremony. The first 10 clinics are opening simultaneously across the realm. I want you on the platform beside me. You're the architect of this change. You should be recognized. I'm just a physician, Alara protested. You're the reason hundreds of children won't die from preventable illnesses, Kyle corrected. You're the reason my kingdom is becoming something worth ruling. Let me honor that. Let the people see who's responsible for this transformation. All right, Alara agreed, but only if you do something for me in return. Name it. Visit Theron's memorial, she said gently. I've seen you avoid that wing of the palace. I know there's a garden dedicated to his memory. Go there. Talk to him. Tell him about the children you're saving now, about the kingdom you're building, about how his death mattered because it taught you the cost of ignorance. Tell him you remember. Kyle's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then he nodded, sharp and pained. Tomorrow, after the ceremony. Would you come with me? I haven't been able to face it alone. Of course, Alara said. The ceremony was beautiful. 10 ribbon cuttings happening simultaneously across the kingdom, connected by magical projection so everyone could watch. Kyle spoke about justice and compassion, about the responsibility of power. He introduced Alara as the physician who'd shown him that true strength meant protecting the vulnerable, not just defeating enemies. The crowds cheered, human and vampire both, and Alara saw something she'd never expected. Unity. Hope. The beginning of genuine change. Afterward, they walked to Theron's garden, a quiet space filled with night-blooming flowers and a marble statue of a smiling child. Kyle stood before it, silent for a long moment. I've become a better king, he said finally, his voice rough. Because I couldn't save you. I've saved other children, built clinics, changed laws, all because losing you taught me what mattered. He paused. I hope you'd be proud. I hope you'd forgive me for failing you. You didn't fail him, Alara said quietly. You loved him. That's all any child really needs, and yes, he'd be proud. The king who emerged from grief is someone worth believing in. 6 months after that night in the forest, the palace held its first public healing festival. Physicians from across the realm gathered to share knowledge, demonstrate new treatments, and train apprentices. It was Alara's idea, supported enthusiastically by Kyle, and it drew hundreds of healers, both human and vampire. The healing wing buzzed with energy. Mira led a seminar on blood parasites. Damien, fully recovered and studying medicine himself, demonstrated microscope techniques to fascinated students, and in the Great Hall, Alara presented the results of the clinic system's first 6 months. 237 lives saved, she announced to the assembled crowd. 17 new physicians trained. 8 villages with 0 child mortality for the first time in their recorded history. This is what we can accomplish when we choose to see healing as a right, not a privilege. The applause was thunderous. Kyle watched from his throne, his expression proud, and when Alara finished, He stood. "Physician Thorn has given my kingdom a gift beyond measure," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "She has saved lives, trained healers, and shown us all that compassion is strength. Therefore, I am establishing the Theron Foundation for Medical Advancement, funded in perpetuity by the Crown, dedicated to ensuring every child in this realm has access to care." The crowd erupted in cheers. Elara felt tears prick her eyes. Naming it after his son was more than honor. It was healing made manifest. That evening, after the festivities quieted, she found Kael in Theron's garden. He sat on a bench beneath the stars, and she settled beside him. "That was beautiful," she said, naming the foundation after him. "He would have wanted his legacy to be saving other children," Kael replied. "I'm finally giving him that." They sat in comfortable silence, and Elara realized how far they'd both come. The terrified woman who'd run through the forest was now a confident physician transforming a kingdom. The grief-stricken king had become a leader who ruled with both strength and compassion. "I need to tell you something," Kyle said eventually. "The council has been pressuring me to remarry, produce another heir. I've refused. Not because I'm still mourning Theron, though I always will, but because I've realized something." He turned to look at her. "I don't need a queen to rule beside me. I need a partner who challenges me, who sees beyond the crown to the person underneath. Someone who ran through a forest screaming for mercy and changed everything." Elara's breath caught. "Kael, I'm human. You're vampire. The complications alone are irrelevant if we don't want them to be," he interrupted. "You've already proven you belong in this palace, in this role. The children adore you. The healers respect you, and he paused, choosing words carefully. "I care for you more than I've cared for anyone since Theron died. You make me want to be better, to do better. You make me believe that grief doesn't have to define me forever. I'm not proposing marriage. I know the political complications would be impossible right now. But I'm asking if you'd consider staying. Not as an obligation or a debt, but because you want to. Because this is home." Elara looked at the garden, at the palace beyond, at the man beside her who'd transformed from terrifying king to trusted friend to something more. "I ran into this forest expecting to die," she said quietly. "Instead, I found a family. Not just the children, but this. You. The work we do. The kingdom we're building together." She met his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere, Kael. This is home." Relief flooded his features, and he reached for her hand. She laced her fingers through his. Vampire and human. Powerful and gentle. Both healing from old wounds. Together they watched the moon rise over Theron's garden, and Elara thought of 6 children sleeping safely in the nursery suite, of clinics spreading across the kingdom, of a foundation that would save countless lives, of a vampire king who'd learned to hope again. All because one desperate woman had run through a forest screaming for mercy, and a grief-stricken king had chosen to listen. The Theron Foundation's first anniversary celebration filled the palace with light and laughter. Children from the orphanages the kingdom now funded performed a play about healing and hope. Physicians presented research on new treatments, and in the Great Hall, a gallery displayed drawings and letters from patients whose lives had been saved by the clinic system. Sarah, now 12 and studying to become a royal advisor, gave a speech about the importance of compassionate leadership. Marcus presented a paper on medical ethics he'd been working on with Elara's guidance. Even Thomas, still prone to tears but braver every day, demonstrated the sign language he'd been learning, a tribute to the prince from the story Elara had told them about other kingdoms. Kael moved through the celebration with ease now, the stiffness that had once defined him replaced by genuine warmth. He laughed at the children's play, discussed medical innovations with visiting healers, and stood beside Elara as they cut the ribbon on the new research wing of the healing center. "You've done this," he murmured to her as they watched the festivities. created something that will outlast us both. We've done this, Elara corrected. I had the medical knowledge. You had the power and will to implement it. Neither works without the other. Together then, he agreed, and the word felt like a promise. Later, when the celebration wound down and the children were tucked into bed, exhausted and happy, Elara and Kyle walked through the palace gardens. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. In 1 year, Elara said, we've opened 30 clinics, trained 120 new physicians, reduced child mortality by 40% in the Eastern Territories. The Foundation is funding research into vampire-specific diseases and human ailments alike. It's working, KL. It's actually working. Because you believed it could, KL replied. When I look back at who I was a year ago, I barely recognize that person. So certain that distance was strength. So convinced that caring made you vulnerable. You were protecting yourself, Elara said gently. That's understandable after what you lost. But you were right too. Caring does make you vulnerable. I care about those children. About you. About this kingdom. And yes, that means I could be hurt again, but it also means I'm living instead of just existing. He stopped walking. Turning to face her, the moonlight caught the silver in his hair, making him look both ageless and entirely present in this moment. Elara Thorne, he said formally, and she felt her heart skip. I'm about to ask you something important. The council has finally accepted that I won't be producing a traditional heir. Damien will succeed me when the time comes. Trained and capable, that leaves me free to make choices based on what I want, not what's politically expedient. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small box. Inside was a ring, simple silver with a moonstone that glowed with inner light. I'm not asking you to be queen. The politics of that are still too complicated, and I know you prefer the healing wing to the throne room anyway, but I'm asking you to be my partner in every way that matters. To stand beside me as we continue building this kingdom. To be family, not just for the orphans we've taken in, but for each other. Elara looked at the ring, at the man offering it, at the life he was proposing. A year ago she'd been running through a forest expecting to die. Now she stood in a palace garden, being offered a future she'd never dared imagine. Yes, she said simply. Yes to partnership. Yes to family. Yes to building something beautiful from the ruins of our separate griefs. Yes to all of it. Kyle slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he did something that would have been unthinkable for the king he'd been a year ago. He pulled her close and kissed her. Gentle and reverent, as if she were something precious he'd feared he'd never find. When they broke apart, both were smiling. The children will be impossible about this, Elara warned. Sarah will immediately start planning a celebration. Marcus will write a philosophical treatise on partnership. Thomas will cry happy tears. Good, Kyle said. Let them. They deserve to see that love doesn't always end in loss, that sometimes broken people find each other and build something whole. They walked back to the palace hand in hand. Vampire and human. King and physician. Two people who'd saved each other in the ways that mattered most. 5 years later, the kingdom of eternal night had transformed beyond recognition. The clinic system had expanded to 50 locations, serving both human and vampire populations. The Theron Foundation had funded breakthrough research in blood parasites, developed new treatments for previously incurable diseases, and established the realm's first medical university. Child mortality had dropped by 70%. Life expectancy for humans had increased by 15 years. And the orphanage program, inspired by 6 children who'd stolen apples, now provided homes and education for over 300 children across the kingdom. Elara stood in the new medical university's grand hall, addressing the first graduating class of physicians. You are entering a profession that demands everything, she told the assembled students. Your compassion, your intelligence, your willingness to see what others miss. But you're also entering a kingdom that values your work, that understands healing as essential to justice. Use your knowledge wisely. Save lives. Question assumptions. And never forget that every patient is someone's loved one, deserving of dignity and care. The graduates cheered, and in the front row, Damien beamed. He was graduating top of his class, planning to specialize in pediatric medicine. Beside him sat Marcus, now 14, and already published on medical ethics. Sarah was in the Royal Academy, training to join the King's Council. The younger children were thriving in palace schools, growing into themselves with the confidence of children who'd always been safe. After the ceremony, Alara found Kyle waiting in their private garden. The space had grown over the years, expanded to include Theron's original memorial but also new sections celebrating life and growth. Flowers bloomed year-round, maintained by magic and careful tending. "How was it?" Kyle asked, pulling her close. "Perfect," Alara replied. 50 new physicians ready to change the world. Or at least save lives and ask uncomfortable questions. Both important, he agreed. "I have news. The Western Territories have formally requested to join the clinic system. That's all 6 regions now. Full coverage across the kingdom." She pulled back to look at him. "Kale, do you realize what this means?" "It means we've done it," he said quietly. "Built something that will outlast us. Changed how vampires and humans see each other. Made healing accessible instead of a privilege for the wealthy. It means Theron's legacy is alive in every child who doesn't die from preventable illness." He touched the memorial stone gently. "I think he'd be proud." "I know he would be," Alara said. She was older now, fine lines appearing at her eyes, while Kael remained unchanged. It was a reality they'd acknowledged and accepted. She would age. He would not. But the love between them had deepened rather than diminished, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. The children appeared then. All 6 of them, plus Damien. They'd planned a surprise. They announced. A dedication ceremony for the new wing of the orphanage, named in honor of Alara and Kyle. "We wanted to thank you," Sarah said. She was nearly 17 now, poised and brilliant. "You saved us when you didn't have to. You gave us not just safety but purpose. You showed us what love looks like when it's real and unconditional." The ceremony was simple but profound. A plaque unveiled, bearing both their names, and a quote Alara had once said, "Family isn't defined by blood, but by who shows up when you need them most." As the sun set, Alara and Kyle stood together, surrounded by the children they'd claimed and been claimed by. The kingdom stretched before them, healthier and more hopeful than it had been in centuries. "I sometimes think about that night in the forest," Alara said. "How terrified I was, how certain I was going to die." "Thank you for choosing differently," Kale replied. "Thank you for running toward danger instead of away, for screaming for mercy when you had every reason to expect none, for seeing past the monster to the man." "You were never a monster," Alara said firmly. "Just a father who'd lost his way in grief. You found your way back." "We found our way together," he corrected. And ahead of them, the future unfolded. More clinics to build, more lives to save, more children to protect. More transformation to nurture in a kingdom learning that strength and compassion weren't opposing forces but complementary ones. The vampire king and the human physician had run toward each other in a forest 5 years ago. One screaming for mercy, one frozen by words that broke through centuries of grief. They'd built a family from orphans and loss. They'd transformed a kingdom through healing and hope. And they'd proven that sometimes the most powerful magic wasn't in fangs or immortality, but in the simple courage of showing up for each other. Day after day, building something beautiful from the ruins of what had been broken. The story that began with "Please kill me instead" had become "Please stay." Together. Always. And in the garden where Theron's memory bloomed eternal, under stars that had witnessed it all, that's exactly what they did.